All right. So here we go. This session will be getting into the very towards the end of the book. We may finish today. We may finish reading. We have about 16 pages left. So we'll just see how the flow goes. I'm happy to go either way. We can either read half of it and pause and finish next week, or we can just go ahead and get through it today. We'll just see how it goes. Yeah, and so as has become a little bit of a rhythm, we'll go ahead and I just want to share my appreciation for Walter Russell and for his life and for his effort to bring through this message of oneness and these teachings about light and how God uses light to create this reality that we get to experience within. And so I'm grateful for Walter Russell and for his wife, Lau, and for the organization that continues to carry his work forward, the University of Science and Philosophy. So I just want to send out my love and gratitude and thanks to all of those entities. And of course, I thank all of the entities who travel with us, the three of us who are here on this call today, to support us in our spiritual journey. And it's my wish that this time together helps us, of course, but also radiates out into the world and serves to spread the message of oneness and how we are all family. We are all connected in spirit. And with that, we begin.
Right.
All right, friends. So we're going to be picking up on page 272. And the section is spectrum analysis. And, we're into this. I think this is kind of the most scientific portion of the reading. It's a little, or I should say it's a lot technical. There's mention of, elements and this and that. So anyway, we'll just, we'll do our best. So if we're ready, we can start reading. I don't know if either of you feel like it, but do you want to read?
Yeah, I'll be glad to start.
Great.
Spectrum analysis. The known octaves which lie within the range of perception are 5 1/2. These begin with the third, or hydrogen octave, and end with the uranium group, which are isotopes of actinium and thorium in the last octave. The invisible octaves of finely divided matter of space are 3 1/2 in number. These octaves are beyond our range of perception, but they are not beyond our knowing. Light is the universal language. Through spectrum analysis of light waves, man has been able to analyze and recognize each element when in its incandescent stage. By means of the spectroscope, he has been enabled to divide light rays through its prisms into the component parts which make up the life history of each stage of its two-way cycle. Each element tells the story of its entire previous incarnations in other octaves since its beginning. Any line in one octave is repeated in the next, but shifted in position because of the changing pressures of each succeeding octave. The spectrum of hydrogen is preponderantly red. A bright red line indicates its present octave. Other red lines tell its past history in lower octaves. The simple history of hydrogen, as compared to the complex spectrum of iron, is like the history of an obscure youth as compared to that of Napoleon. In the spectrum analysis of iron, the lines which belong to iron and those which tell its recent and remote history can be seen at a glance. These lines also indicate the relative ability of the iron atom to charge or discharge. Wavelength 7181.8 is immediately recognizable as belonging to iron in its present octave. 6916.8 is recent history, and 6944.8 is extremely remote history. Herein follows a partial list of lines whose wavelengths belong to iron or to its immediate mid-tone associates, and also other lists indicating its recent and its more remote history. So, should I read all of the numbers?
Oh, I don't think that's necessary. I don't think we'll get a lot out of that.
Yeah, I'm not into numerology, so probably not. The visible and invisible spectrum is divided into 7,000 lines. Each line is different in its shade of color and in its plane. Each line proves that this universe of varying motion is a universe of varying pressures. Atomic structure. Figure 74, though, by the way, relation of tones of the elements to tones of the spectrum. That's interesting. The elements of matter are not different substances or different things. They are different pressure conditions of light waves. The light units of the elements are all alike, but are differently conditioned by the electric pressures exerted upon them during the inward or outward spiral journey from zero to zero. The unanswered mystery of how the elements become mathematically precise octave tones, just as musical tones or color tones of the spectrum are mathematically precise in vibration orderliness, lines in the wave field, gyroscopic principle. Together, the 8 elements of an octave form 2 halves of one whole cycle of tones, which ascend from 0 to the 4-0-4 position of amplitude, and then descend again to 0 to begin anew. The spiral journey contracts into greater pressures as it approaches wave field amplitude positions at spiral apices, and expands into lower ones on the return journey to spiral bases. That two-way spiral journey of each half cycle extends between 6 mirrors of still light, which compose the wave field, and winds around a still shaft, which centers the spiral. 3 of these mirrors are the mirrors of action, and 3 are the mirrors of reaction, which is figure 75. The 3 of action are the inner intersection planes of the cube, and the 3 of reaction are the outer boundary planes of the wave field. All of these planes of the wave field are of 0 curvature, but the spiral universe, which is forming within those planes, is curved. Curved planes of light act as two-way lenses which bend light to focal points and extend it from those focal points radially. As the two-way spirals of forming matter extend from the wave field center in opposite directions toward wave field intersections, the 6 mirror planes of still light focus 3 points of still light upon the still shaft of each cycle. Centers are formed at these focal points, which become the 1, 2, 3 positive and negative elements of matter by rotating gyroscopically upon the wheels of light, which act as equators for those borning tones. Multiplying and dividing pressures determine the density and volume of each succeeding element. The color spectrum records these pressures as the complete history of every element from octave to octave of the whole 9-octave cycle of the elements. Multiplying pressures of the spiral also affect the curvature of its light lenses to such an extent that the focusing positions change their mathematical ratios in conformity with the acceleration of gravity and the deceleration of radiation. The positions of focal centers of gyroscopic wheels upon the wave shaft are thus affected as diagrammed in figure 76 and figure 72. Each element is the square of the distance to and from its succeeding one in accordance with its direction. The direction of gravity is the inverse square, and the opposite direction is the direct square. The volume of each succeeding element is likewise affected directly and inversely as the cube. 6 of the 8 gyroscopic wheels of the whole octave are thus accounted for by a geometric projection of two-way opposed lights through each other from 2 sets of 3 mirror boundary fields. The 4th double tone is formed at the rest point where 8 cube wave fields meet. This is the point of rest, which is known as the center of gravity in Earth's or Sun's, where motion and curvature cease. The completed sphere thus becomes a section of 8 adjoining wave fields and revolves around that point of rest upon the wave shaft, where the 2 half cycles of the wave meet. For this reason, the 4-0-4 position is one of balance, in which the yellow of orange is the dominating color of one of its 2 gyroscopic wheels, and the yellow of green is the other, centered by white. At the 2 points upon the still shaft of the turning sphere, where the shaft penetrates its surface, are the magnetic poles of still light, which control the balance of each sphere's turning. One of these is the north magnetic pole, which controls the winding of the sphere into density by centripetal electric force, and the other is the south magnetic pole, which controls its unwinding centrifugally into space. In a sphere such as our nearly mature sun, these magnetic poles are practically upon the sun's pole of rotation, but oblating planets, such as our Earth, the magnetic poles are removed from that pole of rotation in accordance with the measure of the Earth's oblateness. The elements of matter are miniature stellar systems. Every principle and law which applies to one applies to the other. This solar system is a gyroscopic wheel in the position which iron occupies in the elemental series. When it spirals a little further, it will correspond to a carbon atom. The sun will then be a true sphere, and its new planets will also be true spheres. The gyroscopic principle accounts for that law of nature which causes like elements to seek each other. All decomposing compounds are sorted out, element by element, gyroscopically. The efforts of man to transmute one element into another must be governed by this principle, and not upon the theory that another substance will be obtained by knocking out one electron. It makes no difference how many planets there are in a solar system or atomic system, insofar as its substance as an element is concerned. One or more added or subtracted would not change the element into another substance, any more than one or more children would affect the nationality of their parents. Transmutation will become simplified by observing that the plane of gyration in relation to amplitude and the speed of revolution of the gyroscopic wheel upon its still shaft will alone change volume by either multiplying or dividing density. Great possibilities in new metals lie in the proper application of this principle.
Okay. Pause
New
there.
metals. Periodic table of elements would be expanded then, is what you just said?
Well, metals, I think it might have to do with the fact that metals, are many of the metals we use are a mix of different elements, and they provide different qualities in the metal. So I think what he's saying is that we could have a much finer tuned ability to produce the metals we need with different qualities through this process that he's describing. And now it's not just theoretical. This is one of the places, transmutation of elements was one of the places that he proved in a laboratory was possible. He was able to gain time in the GE, General Electric laboratory, and he repeated an experiment where he had evacuated a metal sphere, and it began with only water in it and oxygen, and he was able to produce nitrogen, I believe it was, in preponderance, like 73% nitrogen gas from the water and oxygen that it began with, through applying this, this model that he's describing. So it's the one place where he actually scientifically proved that what he's talking about is not just, a theoretical possibility. It's in fact quite provable.
Wow.
Right. Yeah, I've heard. I remember reading somewhere at some point that some people believe that silicone can be made into calcium by the body. So if we, I mean, the body only absorbs about 30% of the calcium we eat, and the body needs a lot of calcium. So maybe we get some of our calcium from transmuting silica. The element is called silica, not silicone, silica.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, right. And that could explain, I've always been mystified at how chickens can produce so many eggs with all that calcium. And where do they get all that calcium from? Because they don't seem to consume enough food to absorb that much calcium. But they do eat rocks, and a lot of rocks are made up primarily of silica or silicone. I had to look up at that. I have to look up that. Yeah. So maybe they transmute silica to calcium, and that's how they get all the calcium to make all those eggshells.
That'd be fascinating.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I just feel like there's so many miracles that take place in nature that aren't accounted for by our, by our current mainstream scientific model. It wouldn't surprise me at all that there's that sort of thing taking place all around us.
Right. Maybe.
Yeah. So I think I may have mentioned this to you all before on a previous call, but it's my intention to build a model, like a three-dimensional model of using Walter Russell's diagrams. All these diagrams are they're really well rendered. He was an artist before he became before he became famous. His first career in life was an artist. So he has a lot of skillfulness with with visual, with rendering the visual. His drawings are great and they're very helpful. And he had to make, he had to make hundreds of drawings to describe something that's there's so much happening in this wave field model that he had to sort of like abstract all the dynamics and take it apart piece by piece. So in one drawing, he'll describe the 4 positions, or the 8 positions on the wave. And another drawing, he'll use it to describe the inner planes of the cube. And another drawing, he'll use it to describe, another dynamic. So he's got all these drawings, but they take the model apart, and he never made a drawing where you can sort of see the whole thing happening. And of course you can't, because it's also a dynamic. What he's describing is dynamic. It's constantly moving. So anyway, it's my intention to use our, the modern technology we have and build a model, a sort of like kinetic model that you can actually see the dynamics of what he's talking about in a little bit more of a direct and clear way. And I haven't yet got into that, but I'm very excited about it. I feel like it's going to unlock a lot of the mystery of this teaching, because it takes quite a visual learner, and you have to kind of like really pay attention to what he's talking about. In my experience, I had to read his books a few times, and till I finally kind of was able to develop a picture in my mind of what he's, the movement and the motions that he's describing. And so as we read what we just read, I can kind of see most of it, not all of it, but most of it. But it's hard for me to describe that to you, and it's hard for me to teach that. And so I'm imagining there's a teaching tool that needs to be made that wasn't available in his time. There wasn't computers and 3D model, all the stuff that we have available to us.
So would this be a three-dimensional model, an actual fabric, or would it be a drawing, or what?
It'll be digital, so it'll be a computer model.
Okay.
And it'll be able to move, so it can have motion. Like I want to depict the winding of the spirals that revolve around the wave shaft. In figure 75, since that's the one we crossed through, we can look at that. it does show the main, the main points of his model, but what it doesn't show is around that S-shaped curve that's going through these mirror planes. He doesn't show in this drawing the upward and downward spirals, the mother and father light, spiraling light. Those spirals are winding around that shaft, that S-shaped shaft. And they're interpenetrating each other. And at the nodal points of when those two shafts meet is where matter forms, is where the elements form. And depending on where they meet inside of the wave cube, and depending on the well, I can't list them all, but depending on the rotation, the revolution, the speed, all the dynamics of the spirals will determine which element it is. So basically, what he's saying over and over again is that there's only one substance. Elements are not different substances. Fundamentally, they're all made of the same stuff, and the stuff is light. And it's what Ra would call, I believe, intelligent energy. We just covered session 15, I believe it was, last Sunday, and they reiterate, Ra reiterates that the reference to intelligent energy. There's only one energy in the universe. It's intelligent energy. And so that's the same thing that Walter Russell is saying. There's only one energy, but that energy gets conditioned through this mechanism that he describes very in detail. It gets conditioned into what we call the different elements of matter. And he says, if we were to understand that, we could completely retool our industrial equipment, and we could make anything we needed. There'd be no scarcity of any material. There'd be no scarcity of energy. There'd be no scarcity whatsoever. We could create with abundance anything we needed, and probably with much more elegance and sophistication than we currently do.
So that's basically what the sentence, curved planes of light act as two-way lenses which bend light to focal points and extend it from those focal points radially. Is that basically what you were just talking about?
Yeah. And again, I can imagine that if we developed some language that that broke down the word light and kind of gave it a different word to represent light when it's functioning in different ways, it might be easier to talk about this stuff, because the word light gets used in this teaching in a variety of different contexts, and it means very different things. But yes, the simple answer to your question is yes. That's one of the dynamics that the primary dynamics that I'm referring to. So I don't even know how to get further into it. I mean, I could ask the two of you how much, we're almost at the end. So I could ask like how, I imagine, I know when I was at where you two are at, in my first reading through it, I had an intuitive excitement, and I had a few of the major points of the teaching were starting to like really work inside my consciousness, but a lot of the details weren't yet seated anywhere. So I'm just curious, like how it's going for you, to read through this and make sense of it. And
well, it makes sense when you translate it into the law of one.
Yeah,
Basic
right.
principles, or in this case, maybe even Dewey Larson's work of the speed of rotation of the light and the angles of rotation create the elements. Is this light that's in motion? So yeah, I need translation help.
Yep, totally.
Have either of you studied Dewey Larson's work?
I've looked into it a fair bit. It was years ago, but I looked into it for a while. I wouldn't say I've studied it. I don't understand it fully, but one of the things that stands out to me from my memory of what Dewey Larson says is, I think, and maybe Jim, if this sounds maybe different from what you remember, you could tell me, but I think he says that change, I think he says change is the kind of fundamental component of what creates experience or what creates reality. That like the infinite source is sort of changeless, and it requires change, what he calls change, which is also the same thing as motion, is like the primary unit of like what begins the engine of creation of the universe. And Walter Russell calls it, motion. And motion or change are just two ways of saying the same thing.
Yeah.
But they're very compatible. I mean, from what I can tell, Dewey Larson's description and Walter Russell's description are compatible. They're just coming at it from a slightly different angle, and they use different language. They use different words to describe what
Right.
they're intuiting or what they're seeing.
Yeah. I just realized that what he's talking about here is basically alchemy in transmuting one element into another. I mean, according to legend, the ancient alchemists were trying to change lead into gold.
Right.
And maybe if they worked according to the principles that he described here, they would actually be able to do it.
Mm-hmm. I believe so. I believe that the transmutation of elements is possible.
Mm-hmm.
I do think there were successful alchemists. I think that my understanding of that teaching of alchemy had to be clothed in a mystery school, because it was incredibly powerful, to be able to, if you were able to successfully turn one element into another, it would really give you a leg up on society, right? So those that were teaching that wanted to protect the teachings and make it so that people were, of pure heart, were able to be given access to those inner teachings.
Right. It is said that Saint Germain had a nearly limitless access to gold. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what legend says.
Right. Yeah, one of the things that brings up for me is like the relationship in our world between our technology and our consciousness. I think this was a big topic at homecoming with the conversation about AI, artificial intelligence. It's like, we know from the raw material that the Atlanteans, their technology sort of outstripped their morality in a way. In other words, they got into the deep end of power, being able to manipulate through power life forms and crystals to be able to wield power. But it was a little bit beyond what the people's either moral systems or whatever, like the care for balance and the care for taking care of each other in service to other. There was a bit of an imbalance. I feel like that's, to me, that's pretty obviously still going on. There's a lot more technological power being wielded in our world than there is, moral clarity.
Right.
And it's an interesting part of Walter Russell's work. It's like, it's all out there. I mean, not many people, I think, are able to translate his diagrams and drawings and teachings into usable technology, but there might be some. And he doesn't clothe it at all in, there's no mystery. He puts it all out there. This is the manuscript. And so it's interesting. And maybe it was his perspective that it was time. The world needed it. And of course, the Confederation has had multiple campaigns to bring aid to Earth through technologies. And I think we know that those have often gone awry or had unintended consequences.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Well, the Confederation also, Ross said, for people who are in the beginning stages of learning the Confederation philosophy, they use machines that would give the information until the information was put into practice, and then the Confederation entity itself would speak. So that it was sort of using AI there.
Yeah, right. That always fascinated me when I heard that. I'm like, what kind of machine? What are we talking about here? Like, what is this? Is it just like transmitting like UFO that like orbits the sky somehow and just transmits basic teachings on meditation or basic teachings on whatever?
Yeah. We never got into detail on that, but
Right.
it is
Right.
fascinating.
It is totally fascinating.
Yeah.
Paul McCartney just recently used AI to get the distracting sounds out of John Lennon's voice back in 1980 or so, before he was assassinated, because it wanted to make a song that would be the something that could sort of reunite the Beatles. So he used AI to clear out all of the background noise and get a pure John Lennon voice.
Wow.
Wow.
That's amazing.
It is amazing. So strange.
Mm-hmm.
That's just happened here recently. I was in my iPhone news that I look at when I have my dinner.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Right.
Well, is there anything from what we just read that stands out that either you want to talk about or discuss, or shall we keep going?
I want to go ahead, Ken.
What does the word oblate mean?
Oblate means let's see. There's oblate, and then there's another one. I forget the difference. So one is like a sphere that's kind of spread out, more like towards like a towards like a donut, and the other way is like an ovoid. I think it's oblate and an ovoid, and
Okay.
yeah. So it's
So
a
oblate would be more spread out around the equator.
correct. That's right.
All right. Very good.
And my question was, could you refresh my memory as to what the 404 position is?
Yeah.
Because we studied that a couple of weeks ago too.
Yeah. So if we look at figure 76, that shows it pretty well. It actually shows up on 75 as well. But this is the gyroscope. He calls this the gyroscopic principle. And what he says is, along the wave shaft, which is that that central curved shaft that springs from the center of the cube, and it makes a curved trajectory to the corner of the cube. That's the wave shaft. Along the wave shaft, there are nodal points of pressure. And in figure 76, you can sort of see them demarcated. So from the left to the right, you can see those rings, 1 plus, 2 plus, 3 plus, and then the central ring is called 4 plus plus. And then we have 3 minus, 2 minus, 1 minus. Do you see that on the figure?
Right. Yeah.
Yep. So so those are the plus minus. Those points all along the wave are really significant. And it's a universal phenomenon that at those points in any wave field, there are specific pressure conditions because of the geometry of the whole, the whole structure of what we're talking about. Because of the, I think it's because of the action of the inner planes, the mirror planes, and the way those mirror planes are affecting the light that's coming out of the center. It generates these positions along the wave shaft. And I don't have enough of an understanding of exactly how that's happening, but those points end up being kind of the almost like the scaffolding upon which the elements, the periodic table that he draws hang or something. So there's specific energetic dynamics taking place at 1 plus, 2 plus, 3 plus, and then 4 plus plus, 3 minus, 2 minus, 1 minus. So there's different qualities of condition at each of those points, is the point. And it's meaningful. It's important to the system of science that he lays out. And I can't really explain it a whole lot better than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Help.
But one of the things that ends up being helpful about just even that basic understanding, just even understanding, okay, what is he talking about with these nodal points, these plus, plus and minus positions, these focal centers, he calls them. The positions of focal centers of gyroscopic wheels upon the wave shaft are thus affected as diagrammed in figure 76 and figure 72. So in a lot of his other drawings, he uses those positions to organize the drawing. So let's see. Let me see if I can just run back some pages. Okay, yeah. So I'll just on page 275 in figure 74. Right. So this diagram is called relation of tones of the elements to tones of the spectrum. And in this diagram, there's no cube. There's no cube. There's no mirror planes, but there is the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0 geometry, let's call it. And so it ends up being a device. Those focal positions end up being a device that helps him organize and kind of overlay the different, describe the different dynamics taking place within the wave field and within the cube sphere. And so you'll see that again and again. He'll use those points within these other ways of drawing, these other ways of describing the system. So you can, so that you'll see that 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0 again and again, even though they're taken out of context of their of their spatial position in the cube, but they're still, they're, I don't know if this is making sense what I'm saying. It's how you can map one diagram to another. You can he'll use those positions as the way to tie them together, if that makes sense.
So Ross said that Dewey Larson's work was basically going to be important in the fourth density. Now, as I remember when we started studying The Secret of Light, Walter Russell said that this was something that we were not ready for some time, and there just now was. Is that anything there ring a bell?
Yeah, Russell shared his model with scientists all over the world, including Nikola Tesla. And Tesla and he they corresponded. And Tesla told him that he should put this away for 1,000 years. The world's not ready for it.
Oh yeah, I remember that now. 1,000 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a long time.
Here we are studying it.
Yeah. And as we know from the raw material, that Tesla got jaded. He came in as this high angelic being with this very pure desire to serve humanity by bringing light, both physical and metaphysical, into the world to lighten the load, lighten the vibration. And somewhere along the way, he went through such hard knocks. This is my translation, but I think it's true that he got jaded. He took a kind of tarnished view of humanity because of all the hard knocks he went through, and it affected his spiritual journey somewhat.
Yeah.
So maybe that colored his comment to Walter Russell.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I wonder what Ra would say about Tesla if he gained or lost polarity during his incarnation. If he got so jaded, maybe he lost polarity. I hope not, but I wonder.
I sort of think it was a stumbling block for him, but I don't think he lost polarity. I would imagine he gained polarity. What I understand of his life is that he ended his life. He didn't have a lot of fame, or he wasn't self-important. He didn't have a lot of money or social recognition. I think he really tried to deliver his gift to the world till the very end.
Right. Yeah, he was very service to others.
Yeah.
Right. For sure.
Even through all of the hardships he went through, he still tried.
Right.
And that intention is the thing, right? Ross says that the intention is the primary determiner.
Right. Yeah.
Well, what do you all think about finishing up the reading? Shall we?
Sure, we can do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kent, would you like to read?
Sure.
Okay, 281, the shape of the universe.
The shape of the universe. This ageless universe has no shape. It has a seeming infinite extension, but that extension is a reflected one. This electric universe of two-way extended light is but a series of mirrors which reflect into each other through curved lenses. Its seeming extension might be likened to a light within a mirror-bound room. One light within such a mirrored enclosure would seemingly extend infinitely, but the light thus mirrored would be the same light. The reflected extension would have no reality. The idea of continuity or discontinuity is based upon mirrored effect of an initial cause. Continuity infers time. Time is but one of the effects which constitutes this universe. Time flows two ways, but the senses detect only the forward flow. They cannot detect the backward flow, which cancels out the forward flow. Time is as unreal as the wave universe is unreal. What is true in principle of one wave is true of all waves. Each wave is a two-way reflected extension of an equilibrium zero, which we call a vibration. Vibrations appear, disappear, and reappear from their source of rest to manifest idea, which is existent alone in rest. Just as a vibration of one wave disappears into its zero of universal stillness, so do all vibrations disappear into the universal zero of stillness. This zero universe of vibrating waves can have no shape other than a seeming one. The voiding principle. This is a zero universe of seeming mechanical motion or force exerted in a seeming three-dimensional universe. Every action of any nature begins with zero, counts up to 9, to end and begin again at 0. Beyond 9, it cannot go, but up to 9 it must go. 9 is universal. 9 is universal because it is the wave field number. The 8 of the cube centered by the 0 of gravity in the sphere. Our decimal system is based upon the wave field of the cube sphere. It is as follows. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0 equals 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The musical scale and the spectrum of nature correspond to the wave field tones. They are as follows. Musical 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, rest, sol, sol, fa, mi, re, do. Tone keynote. Spectrum, black, red, orange, yellow, white, yellow, green, blue, blue, black. Tones, violet, violet. Okay, we'll have to talk about that later, I guess. Figure 75 demonstrates this fact. The three centering planes are centered by 0. All intersections of these planes add up to 8. 8, centered by their 0 source, equals 9. Likewise, the cube itself adds up to 8 by counting the intersections of its 6 faces. Also, there are 8 directions of action and 8 of reaction. Each 8 being 4 pairs, which are 9 by adding the centering 0. 9 is the 3 times 3 of length, breadth, and height, extended from 0. The length, breadth, and height of any expression is 2 extended zeros centered by 0. Figure 2, page 219. Do you want to look at that, or should I continue reading?
Let's go ahead and continue reading.
Length and breadth are static, for they are both on equipotential levels. Height is dynamic, for it is radial. The universal 9 of matter and space is 3 mirrors of rest, centered by rest, from which all 3 extend at right angles to each other. each mirroring itself into the other. The universal 9 of the octave is 4 pairs of opposite pressures extending diagonally from 0, which centers the cube, to 8 zeros which corner the cube. Figure 75. The measure of extension from 0 to 0 is desire for extension. Desire for extension from 0 to 0 is energy in 0. Energy extended from 0 to 0 is manifested by pressures of desire, equally multiplied and divided, equally added and subtracted, equally credited and debited, equally and oppositely conditioned. The sum of all these balanced effects is 0. Again, figure 75. 0 pressures equally multiplied and divided are manifested by the action and reaction of motion. Motion is a projection of the opposed energy pressures of desire from within a centering 0 to the extended mirrors of rest, which measure desire and mirror it back to rest in the centering 0 as expressed desire. The sum of dually reflected motion thus expressed is 0. 0 thus extended by action to fulfill desire for expression, and simultaneously mirrored back to manifest the fulfillment of expressed desire, is all there is to this universe of rest. 0 multiplied or divided, added or subtracted, extended or retracted, results in 0. This is a 0 universe in all effects of motion, a seeming universe in time and sequence, and a mirage universe of imagined form. It is a universe of 2 negations which simultaneously cancel each other and sequentially repeat the cancelling of their negations to create the illusion that 0 can be multiplied or divided or added to or subtracted from, to create a reality which never is nor can become. Again, figure 75. That is what creation is. It is the imagining of knowing. Knowing is light. Light is still. Imagining is thinking. Thinking is the imagined action and reaction of motion, mirrored from 0 of rest to 0 of rest. This is a still universe of the light of knowing. In it is no activity. Should I read the figure, what it says in the figure?
I kind of feel like it would be a distraction. Let's keep going with the text.
Okay. But what about our senses? Our senses tell us otherwise. Our senses are inadequate. They deceive us mightily, and that is good, or else the play of creation could not be played. The senses record but little of the whole. If the senses could but see the whole, there would be no play. The senses record motion alone, for the senses themselves motion. Motion only seems, it has no being. The senses do not know, but man believes that his senses do know, and in that belief lies man's confusion. The senses, being but motion, sense moving things, and moving light mirrored as moving things. They sense the forward movement of an airplane piling up compression ahead of it, but they do not record the mirrored, invisible counterpart of that plane, equal to it in potential and speed, moving backward into a vacuum behind the plane, which simultaneously voids the compression ahead of it. This inadequacy of the senses to record the backward flow of forward-moving things causes the illusion of sequence and time. In figure 77, this principle, diagrammed by arrows extending 2 ways from every element in the whole known series, indicates that integration is simultaneously balanced by disintegration. No time interval elapses between the debiting of any credit extended to opposites in nature. Figure 78 diagrams all matter as pairs of opposite conditions. Each line is connected with its opposite mate. Each of the pair is a negation of the other one. Each pair is conditioned as the 2 tanks of an air, as the 2 tanks of air in figure 18 and the storage battery in figure 19 on page 231 are conditioned. Each one of these elemental pairs is an equal and opposite mirrored extension from the centering 0 fulcrum. The fulcrum of all effect is the one light of God. God alone is in man and in all things. Every action is voided as it occurs, is repeated as it is voided, and recorded as it is repeated. From the Divine Iliad. 1.
Thank you, Kent.
So we end with the law of 1.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. And we end back in the domain of the mystery as well.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And this deep philosophy of oneness and how can it be? And the piece about the senses, I thought that stood out to me. The senses record but little of the whole.
Mm-hmm.
It's like our senses are our primary, way of trying to make sense of our reality, right? I mean, empirical science, the scientific method, and the process of observation specifically says you have to be able to sense it to be able to, say that it's true or not true.
Mm-hmm.
So is this because our senses cannot perceive true reality, or because we do not use them correctly?
Well, the physical senses are not capable of registering what Walter Russell is referring to as the simultaneous backward movement of all motion. So everything is born in pairs, but our senses only perceive the forward moving line of time. They don't perceive, they are incapable of perceiving the other half. But that doesn't mean that we don't have inner senses. It doesn't mean we don't have the capacity to know. In fact, Walter Russell says we can know. We can know all of this, but we have to look within to know it. We can't use our senses to know it.
Ross said the third density is not the density of understanding. So would this be easier for us to perceive when we get out of the third density? We don't have a veil of forgetting. We're in the fourth density.
I imagine so. And, I also think that, Ra has resolved the paradoxes, but they also seem to say they have not resolved the mystery. The mystery is unsolvable.
Right.
If you're positioned in the creation, anywhere in the creation, you're still susceptible to, you're finite. You're a part of the finite portion of the creation. So I don't know if you can, as a finite portion of the creator, I don't know if you can take in the fullness of the creator from that perspective. And its capacity and its design and how it creates the whole thing.
Right. Well, Ross says all begins and ends in mystery.
Right.
And I think that's the way I would prefer it. If I could understand the nature of creation and the creator with my mind, it's not big enough.
Right. Yep. I mean, I took notes. I highlighted some things here. There's some very profound correlations here in what we just read to the law of one. I think there's a strong correlation to Ra's teachings on healing and balance, where we hold the opposites, right? Where if we become aware of something in our mind or our body, and it's catalyst for us, it has our attention. For some reason, we're focused on it. We are interested in it. Ra talks about taking it through the process of balancing it with its opposite.
Right.
And I really deeply sense that that's really connected to this teaching, right? Walter Russell says everything is born in pairs. Everything is born in pairs of opposites. We're not aware of that because that's the design. The design of the illusion is purposeful. It's meant to be so that we can't experience those, that simultaneously experience those opposites. So that catalyst can take place so that we can be confused. It's like the law of confusion. It's like the first distortion of the creator. So this notion that like all things are constantly perfectly balanced. Like that's one of the main things of this teaching that I find so deeply inspiring, is that every iota of the universe is in perfect balance. You know, of course, that's not always apparent to me. I'm not always in that awareness and knowing,
Right.
but the reminder that like it has to be so, because that's the nature of creation. The creation comes into form through perfect balance, always. And I find that very powerful.
Yeah.
And I think that's the nature of Ra's teaching on healing and balance, is to discover that for ourselves, to resolve that within ourselves, to realize that if we're angry, you know, there is the resolution to that within us. There is the forgiveness necessary, or there is the understanding necessary for that interaction, for that, you know, whatever the focus of our anger is, and every experience we can have. And I think at the level of experiences, it's much more complex than at the level of elements. You know, Walter Russell's talking about how each element has a pair, and those pairs complete each other. All right, well, that's one thing, because that's quite, you know, we're talking about discrete units. At the level of human experience, the game is much more complex at that point. You know, what gives us an experience of another human, I mean, there's so much information there at that point. There's so many elements, there's so many vibrations of you know, what we would call emotion. There's so many mental images. I mean, it's quite a different story. So it's much less simple to do the balancing exercises that Ra gives. But I think that the essence of it is the same. The essence of it is that everything we can experience has its balance within us. And if we can find it, then we can find oneness. And that's the path to knowing ourselves and accepting ourselves and becoming the creator.
But we use the seeming separation as grist for the mill, food for growth.
Right.
Because of the veil of forgetting.
Right.
Right. I have another reflection to make. So at the beginning part that I read on page 281, it says, this electric universe of two-way extended light is but a series of mirrors which reflect into each other through curved lenses. Are you seeing what I'm reading?
Yes.
It's under the shape of the universe. Okay. Its seeming extension might be likened to a light within a mirror-bound room. One light within such a mirrored enclosure would seemingly extend infinitely, but the light thus mirrored would be the same light. So that reminds me of Einstein's law of conservation of energy, if you're familiar with that, which says that energy cannot be created or destroyed, but only converted from one form to another.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect sense. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And in fact, if I can build on that,
great.
and that's the teaching here, is that there are the conversions that take place within matter, as Walter Russell describes it. There are 18 conversions.
Okay.
Those are the 18 dimensions of matter.
Right, okay.
Length, width, breadth, time, rotation, revolution, valence. I can't remember them all, but that's all that's happening, is it's converting the one energy into different forms.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then that conversion produces the diversity of, elements that we experience that make up the building blocks of space-time, that make up the building blocks of third density. Well,
Right.
I mean, they make up the building blocks of first density, actually. And then first density uses them to produce biological life. And then biological life produces self-awareness. And then here we are.
Right, yeah. And here we are.
It only takes a couple billion years.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. It's amazing how short third density is compared to all the other densities.
It is. It's a blink.
It's a blink, yeah, right.
I mean, it sounds 75,000 years to us sounds like an incredibly long time. And of course, on a relative scale, it is. But compared to billions of years, it's almost nothing.
Right, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear from you two when he says, just in the next paragraph of what you read, Kent, he says, time flows two ways, but the senses detect only the forward flow. Can either of you conceive of that? Can you even like wrap your head around that at all?
Not from a human viewpoint, but I mean, it makes sense theoretically, philosophically, but I can't, from a human perspective, wrap my head around it. No.
Right.
Right.
I'm about the same way.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that Confederation entities talk about it, and I know that higher dimensional entities talk about, like Ross says, they don't experience time like we do. You
Right.
know, they're kind of beyond linear time.
In the eternal present.
Yeah.
Past, present, and future are only relative here in the third density, supposedly.
Right.
Right.
And I think that's this. So they experience time flowing in two ways. And somehow the senses that are beyond the five senses are now fully unlocked, or fully available to a sixth density entity. And my sense is that we can at least begin to experience those extra senses, those inner senses, those spiritual, the spiritual sight and spiritual touch and spiritual hearing and these sorts of things. But I think it's, it's, unless you're incredibly advanced adept, it's still fairly faint compared to what Rock, just experiences in a normal consciousness state.
Well, they've become light. So they became what they sought. That's what we're apparently on the journey to do too.
Yeah, I look forward to that.
Well, and they don't say this in these words, but that's all we are too. We're just light.
Right.
When they say they become light, it's like, well, we're light also.
Yeah.
But we're in a condition where we think it's something else. We think it's matter, separate from light and quite distinct. But that's all that's happening. It's all that exists in the universe from Walter Russell's perspective. All there is light.
Yeah, right.
And Ross says it's just moving, it's just dancing thoughts.
Right.
All just dancing thoughts.
Dewey Larson said it's all motion.
Same as Walter Russell.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, Dewey Larson says time is created through motion also, right?
Yeah, I think he said there were 3 dimensions of time and 3 dimensions of space.
Yeah. So the 3 dimensions of time would be past, present, and future.
Right. And in space, I guess, is length, width, and height, I guess.
I don't think it's past, present, and future. I mean, I am not an expert on this, so just take it all with a grain of salt. But the way I make sense of time space and Dewey Larson's model, and after having sat with the Law of One for a long time and read this material, I don't think it's past, present, and future so much as it is almost like different possible choices, different possible scenarios. Like maybe different dimensions of time could lead us to sort of what we kind of call branches of different possible choices we could make or something. Right. So if I went back to when I was 13 years old and I made that, I decided to do that thing or whatever, I think in time space I can go back and discover what it would have been like if I would have made the different choice.
Yeah, you can travel in time.
You can travel in time and go to the different timelines where you made a different choice. You can explore in in like, in the space of consciousness, you can explore different timelines.
Right. But it doesn't seem like the timelines would be limited to only 3. It seems like there could be an almost infinite number of timelines.
Just like space. Space is
Right.
an almost infinite number of points in space.
Right. So where does the 3 dimensions of time come in?
There's like the one dimension of space is like that's our perspective. We're stuck in time space. We're stuck in our perspective.
Right.
So I can't know what choices you made, or I can't know what choices Jim made, but I can know my condition of consciousness. So I'm stuck in space. I can't move from that point in space, but I can explore an infinite variety of what I would call imagination, or I can imagine and maybe even actually travel to different timelines or something. I don't know. It's not super crystallized, but I feel like that to me, the dimensions of time are more about different choices we can make, different realities we could have experienced had we made different choices, rather than like just past, present, and future. I'm not sure.
Right, but something I recall reading somewhere is that there have been instances where like planes have blinked out of existence and then reappeared. I mean, this has been in many movies and TV shows. They have played with this concept, but I understand it's actually happened for real in real life also. And it seems like they went into time space for a moment and then came back out. And if they were traveling eastward, I can't remember which is which, but for example, if they were traveling eastward when it happened, they jumped forward in time, and if they were traveling westward, they jumped backwards in time. Or it might have been vice versa. I can't remember for sure. So that to me that implies that what we experience in this reality as direction is experienced in time space as forward or backward in time.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I could see that. I see what you're saying. And that very well could be. But the thing specifically that Ross says that gives me the impression that there might be more to it, is when Ross says, they suggest that we don't suppress our desire.
Okay.
However, in the situation where if we were to explore our desire, it could hurt somebody, they say don't do it in space-time. Don't do it in reality. Do it in your mind. Sometimes it's appropriate to explore our desire only in mind. And that's what I'm talking about. I feel like that's bringing it to time space instead of bringing it to space time.
Right.
And we don't manifest it in reality.
I remember that.
But we do explore it and we learn from it. But we learn from it through exploring time space. Maybe.
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
Well, in session 16, Don asks, or Ross says that there are 7 subdensities to our density and 7 subdensities to that, and it goes on infinitely. And so Don said, well, does that mean that whatever I think of is occurring somewhere? And Ross said, it could. And so Don said, if I dream of, or think about building a ship, would that occur in one of these? And they said, well, it would have, or shall, or has occurred. And then Don said, well, what if I think about battling another entity? And then Ross said, that would be something personalized that you could actually create and could make something that would be a difficult experience, in other words. So some of those experiences of creating thoughts in the various subdensities have a reality to them, and that it makes it more possible they will happen, whereas others that are not connected to yourself happen by themselves elsewhere.
Right. That's right. And I think, Jim, I think that connects to the part we read earlier about desire. And Walter Russell talks about the dimension of desire will actually like is what sort of like so God's desire, and of course we're co-creators, we're part of that. When I say God's desire, that includes us.
Yeah.
God's desire is what generates the wave field. Like an intense desire is going to create a larger field of possibility for that desire to take place within, versus something that isn't as strong a desire.
Right.
So the desire that creates suns is larger than the desire that creates atoms or whatever. And again, I don't know exactly, maybe that's a strange example, but it comes up in the context of like Don saying, if I think of building a ship, or if I think of a bellicose action, well, I think what impacts whether and where that shows up in all these different subplanes is how much Don actually wanted it or wants it. Like if Don literally, really at his core of his being was like wanted to be a shipbuilder in some lifetime, he may actually create a life where he does that. Or there might, but if it's just like some passing whimsy that he has no actual desire in his soul stream to do, it'll probably just be a little blip in the astral plane, or something. Like it won't necessarily manifest in the same way.
Right.
That reminds me of a quote from An Act of Faith, which is An Act of Faith. That's the book I translated into Swedish. The entity there is named TOTOH, and TOTOH says, manifestation is thought embraced by emotion. So we can have thoughts, but if they're not strong embraced by emotion, it may not create any manifestation. So that would be a flimsy thought, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
But if the thought is embraced by a really strong emotion and desire, that makes it more likely that it would be manifested.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, and you can't fake it either. Like you can have a thought, but you can't fake your emotion, the emotion that comes up in relation to that thought. Like we each have a truth, right? We each have something that we care about or don't care about. And so even if we have a thought or someone gives us a thought, our emotion is our guide, kind of our guidance system that tells us how it matches to our soul essence.
Right. Yeah. 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 Makes sense. And that thing in time space, individuals are locked in space, but they can move about in time. Whenever I hear that, I always think of plants, like trees, for example. Trees are stuck even in our reality, plants are kind of stuck in space. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if they are in consciousness able to move in time. I mean, there's research that has been done by Cleve Baxter, for example, and others, plant researchers, that have found that once you connect with a plant, especially trees have a pretty high degree of sentience. Once they have connected with you and connected with your consciousness, they remain connected with you. So like I have a big oak in my front yard here, and I spend a lot of time around that oak. So according to what these researchers are saying, that oak is permanently connected to me. So whatever I do, when I go to work, when I travel, whatever I do, that oak is constantly connected to me and can live vicariously through me. So based on this understanding, plants can live vicariously through animals and humans by connecting with them one time, and from that point on, they remain connected with that individual.
That's
in
neat.
consciousness. Yeah, right.
I believe it. Trees are amazing.
Yeah.
But Ross said that the plants and animals in gardens, the gardens is something that they feel the presence of love when you're gardening, and they
Right.
return it.
Right. I'm sure.
I'm sure you
You
experience
must,
that a lot, Jim, don't you?
yeah, you must be experiencing a lot of that, Jim.
Yeah, I talk to my plants a lot,
Mhm.
All right.
and I fertilize them with love.
Yeah, right. That's great.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Mhm.
Well, and we'll send love to your sycamore so it can live its fullest life and continue to experience the beauty of that place
Mhm.
in exchange with you and all the others and myself. I can see that tree in my mind's eye right now.
Yeah, I can see it too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you for sending love to the sycamore.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
beautiful, beautiful, wonderful tree. Offering
Oh,
so much service.
can I add one more thing?
Of course.
One of our fellow Law 1 students, Sandra, I can't remember her last name. She was at the homecoming. Sandra something. She posted a thing on Facebook, a little video snippet of some plant scientists, and they were saying that plants have what photoreceptors, like photon receptors, like we have in our eyes, and they can actually see with those photon receptors the way we can see with our eyes, but they're like spread out. They're not localized in eyeballs like ours are.
Mm-hmm.
And they can distinguish between colors. So if you wear a red shirt or a blue shirt, they can distinguish between. They can see if you're wearing a red shirt or a blue shirt. And I guess I'm not sure how they found that out, but I guess there is some experiment where the researcher would come in a certain color shirt, and they would give the plant water or something, or nutrients, or maybe they would cause some harm to the plant. And so another day they would come in again with the same color shirt, and they would measure the emotional electrical response of the plant to see if it would, so if it would indicate happiness because it was expecting to get nutrients or water when you came in with that color shirt, or if you came in with a different color shirt, it might expect to be harmed, so it expressed fear. I mean, I guess that's how they might have done the research, but they didn't specify that. They didn't specify it in the video. Yeah.
Well, it's another. I think that example you just shared is like another window into like it's all it's all light. It's all the creator experiencing itself.
Yeah. Right.
Through the different manifestations of light.
Yeah.
And light is just a lot more diverse than we tend to think about it. It's like it's all light.
Yeah.
Everything is actually light.
Yeah. Just looks like it's material objects.
Right.
Yeah.
It looks like it's t-shirts, blue t-shirts and red t-shirts.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating. Well, friends, thanks for closing out this round of reading. I want to just say that I don't know how long it's going to take me, but I feel pretty committed to this this next phase of learning how to like spread this teaching a little bit better and more easily. And I'll generate a presentation at some point or a series of them, and I will definitely let you know about it. And hopefully you two can help me like refine that once I get into it some.
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Cool.
All right. Thank you,
Thanks
Aaron.
for reading through this. Thanks for sticking with it and being on the journey with me. I really appreciate the friendship and the camaraderie and companionship and the deep love and insight that you all bring to this. So thank you. I love you both.
It's been a great learning experience, and thank you for facilitating as always. You've done such a great job.
Yeah. Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure.
Yeah. Amazing. All right. So are we going to do anything else? Are we going to do anything else on Wednesdays?
BJ wants to spin up a new reading group of reading one of Rupert Spira's books on meditation and the direct path.
Okay. Very good.
So stay tuned for that. It'll come through Telegram. I'm sure she'll make an announcement about it sometime.
Right.
Okay.
But for now, we're on a pause. We're on summer break.
All right. Summer break. Okay. Very good.
All
All
right.
right, friends. We'll talk to you
Yeah.
later.
Thank
Have a good
you.
evening. Love you all.
Yeah, love you. Bless
Yeah.
you.
Absolutely. Love you. Bye-bye.
Bye.